BSI webinar. Apologies for this 2 minutes delay. We were having some last minute checks in the background. Today, we will be discussing about managing psychological health, safety, and well-being in the workplace, which is something quite relevant, not only today, but in fact, in this ever-changing environment. And globally or regionally, the pressures that we are facing as employees in our workplace and how it would affect individuals, how it would affect organizations, and some of the tips that can be shared with you to cope with that. Uh, that's what we're going to discuss. There will be also a discussion that will be supported by the relevant international standard. I would like to leave it to the upcoming slides. Thank you very much for being here and enjoy the rest of the webinar. So, if some housekeeping rules, dear everyone, all attendees will be muted during the session. However, we will be running the session for 30 minutes, the presentation. The rest of the 30 minutes is allocated for a Q&A session. So you can ask questions at any time during this 30 minutes. We will be keeping that. But after the 30 minutes, when we complete the first half of the webinar, we will stop and I will try to reply as many questions as we can. However, if your question is not replied, please don't worry about this, because we will be collecting these questions and we will reach out to you. Our marketing team will reach out to you with the replies of these questions collected from myself and other subject matter experts working at BSI. Okay. So the first thing is I would like to start with a reminder about these sessions. In fact, this is the second of 8 webinars that started. The first one started on May 4 and it will go until June 4. We have divided these webinars into 3 categories. The first category consists of 3 webinars. We are at the second one of it. And this category is called Protect Your People, Your Systems, Your Operations. We already have run the first webinar about maintaining business resilience during disruptive instance. The recording of this webinar will be ready and will be, of course, shared with those who request that. And we are here at the second webinar, Managing Psychological Health, Safety, and Wellbeing in the Workplace. And the last webinar of this category will be completed next week, May 11th. It will be about supporting vulnerable persons in emergency. Dear everyone, all these webinars are and the information shared are supported with international standards, relevant international standards. So you can trust these are the tested ones and globally applied and recognized ones. Okay, so the agenda for today will be, we will first discuss about some fundamental terminologies and the background of the psychological health, safety, and well-being. You will also discover some of the things that even those who are working on this area may not be familiar with. Following that, we will also share with you where this information comes from, the international framework for the psychological health, safety, and well-being. That will be the end of the 30 minutes. Following that, as I mentioned, we will move to the Q&A session. Okay, so let's start with the terms and definitions here. There are 2 significant terms and definitions. One of them is a very significant and critical one. Some of us may also relate ourselves during our career. We have been there. Presentism. It sounds like something quite positive. However, as it is mentioned here, even we are feeling physically or mentally unwell, we feel that we are obligated to be present in our workplace. Today's world make it little bit easier, but there may be some traps behind it. What I mean is, today's world, different than how we were working 20, 30 years ago. We can be present at our workplace virtually as well. However, this does not mean that presentism, illness, is not in place. If you are feeling unwell, that will prevent you to be working, prevent you to be present, but you are obligated to be present working from home, for example, online. That will also be an example of presentism. So there may be a trap for organizations and individuals, intentionally or unintentionally, behind that decision, dear everyone. The other one is, we can say, the core of the international standard we will discuss today, the psychosocial risk. This is just like in any other risk assessment or risk identification or risk analysis. It's a combination of the likelihood and the consequence of that, which is relevant to work-related hazards, that may lead to work-related injury and ill health to the individuals, individual groups, or society. Okay, here is an interesting one, dear all. We will be discussing about the invisible risk here. Now, in occupational health and safety management, if we are having physical risks, they are in front of us, they are invisible, and they are the things that are tested and shared with other individuals openly. This is why, in means of risk identification, or maybe let's go to another step down, in means of vulnerability identification, these are the risks, the physical risks are easier to identify. We have a larger knowledge database here. We have a more comfortable communication environment here. However, when it comes to psychological risk, this is the one that we can categorize as invisible risk. These are the ones not physically seen. In many cases, you cannot even tell if one of your colleagues, one of your friends is under such a pressure, which can be the burnout, anxious, being anxious. You cannot even tell with their daily routine, under their daily routine. This is why these are the invisible risks. Other than that, these are the ones, even when they are not a risk, when they become an instant, not easy to share because of various reasons that we will come there later on. This is why we cannot just go with the traditional ways of identifying risks, sourcing risks. When it comes to psychological risk, we need to build more innovative approach to identify, to detect, and to implement the right risk treatment on the psychological risks. At that point, we will quickly stop, and we would like to get your opinion before we move further. As a presenter, your replies will also help me. We will have a quick poll question. How would you describe your organization's current approach to psychological well-being? Okay, we are receiving more answers now. Okay. Now, we react when issues arise. No proactive plan is the second bigger portion, but like 40% of our participants said that their organization have a formal strategy in place to deal with that. This is something amazing to hear, because psychological health, occupational health, and safety, and also well-being are not the topics that have a long history, just like physical occupational health and safety. Of course, after OSAS 18001, once ISO 45001 standard was published, and it was touching also the areas about cognitive health, that give the organizations a better view why they need to consider the cognitive health, because this is not only about for human purposes, but this is also, there is also an organizational resilience reality behind it, which in the upcoming slides, again, we will continue discussing that. Okay, a few significant things. What are the ways of recognizing early signs of psychological strain? Dear everyone, first of all, recognizing this starts from us. If we cannot help ourselves, we cannot help others. It is just like when you are flying from A to B, the the signs that you are receiving, first help yourself, then help your children or vulnerable people around you, right? That's why we first need to identify it on ourselves. A few important things here. What to look in our teams? Behavioral. If there is any chance, behavioral chance that are happening, like increased number of errors, not in a way to be punishing people, but identifying, or not in a way that is a quantitative approach. What will be the errors? Increasing errors will be a sign for us to determine if there is something going wrong. By the way, it is not only for individuals, we can also think about groups of individuals. A good example is a group of people who are working on a project for a long time. So that can have an effect collectively on them, which will be a higher risk for the organization and the other colleagues as well. Emotional ones, when we watch out our people, our colleagues, our friends at the workplace, we can see that there will be emotional outbursts that may show itself during a meeting, during the way that they are walking, during the way that they are saluting other people, saying good morning to other people. We can also identify that. Yes, the psychological strains would also lead to physical illnesses as well. In fact, this is a more concerning, this is a bigger red flag area that we can say. If that started to have physical impacts as well, we may not always find the root cause if it's a psychological strain, but we can do a, if I can call it a reverse engineering to find it, it's just due to a psychological strain led to a physical problem, a physical complaint. Of course, cognitive, as some of us might be familiar with ISO 45001 standard, in many of its areas, in introduction, in the scope of the standard itself, it talks about, it highlights the cognitive health safety. So this is another significant indicator. The other one is relational. If our colleagues, uh, of course, there is another way of that, dear everyone. If we start to have a single standardized colleague approach, we may put people under pressure who wants to be more lonely compared to others. We need to observe that people who are starting to be lonely rather than people who prefer to be lonely. So we also need to differentiate that. Definitely subject matter experts in the workplace will be helping us rather than us taking an initiative. So if there are any relational distances that started to happen, and definitely the work performance. Um, uh, this is something related to work performance, but we can also go through that like colleague supporting performance. I personally don't believe that we need to take it under the work performance itself. This is an initiative taken by a colleague, by a friend who is supporting another colleague. This can also be an indicator. If a decrease in that performance would also relate to relational detachment and also emotional issues that we may have with our colleagues. Okay, now the invisible risk, dear everyone, without psychological safety. People prefer to stay silent to protect themselves. This is the reality. That can be an indicator of an safe and healthy workplace as well, if they are preferring to stay silent. But even our workplace is quite open in this communication. There is a major cognitive well-being workplace in the place that we are working. People can still stay silent. So assumption is the enemy in psychosocial risk assessment, dear everyone. So we should not assume that our workplace is quite open. We have a mature environment, so everyone will be talking. Those people who are not talking, they prefer not to talk. This will not be the right approach. Assumption is the enemy for psychosocial risk. Uh, the errors go unreported because we don't have a track of this. We continue saying that these are the things that may happen in a workplace. Yes, fear of looking incompetent, especially for the new hires, dear everyone. Again, an assumption is the enemy, as we said. A new hire does not mean a person who came to this organization refreshed. We cannot assume these people had a career break for 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. They may left their workplace, which they have been exhausted mentally on Friday, and they may started to work on Monday, or they left on Thursday, they start to work on Sunday. This is why no assumption for the new joiner colleagues as well, and they will be more vulnerable to look incompetent. This is why we need to be observing around us and find the ways that can lead to early signs, that can lead to vulnerabilities. The leadership is disconnected from reality. The leadership in a bubble, they may only see the results. They can be good or bad. That has nothing to do with that may have nothing to do with the psychological well-being, cognitive well-being in the workplace. So leadership should be among the people, and maybe they would attend to the initiatives that are taken mostly in human resources, people development teams, right? That are taken by them to observe what is happening on the ground with their workplace. The reality is, before we go to move to the next topic, the reality is humans are still the most significant resources for any organizations. We will see in the future if artificial intelligence will change or will have an effect or not. But right now, in today's world, or in the short term or mid-term, humans are still remaining the most valuable resource. This is why leadership would be, just like in many organizations today, we have a better maturity than a few decades before, and they should continue looking after their most significant resources. With psychological safety approach, people definitely raise concerns early. They speak up. They don't have any fear of speaking up, as opposite of the left-hand side. Mistakes become learning opportunities for everyone, so they will not be repeated, or the number of these repetitions will be reduced. Diversities are welcomed among the teams. This is the time that you can trust assumptions are killed in the organization. When you receive diverse views from different colleagues, different backgrounds, different departments, people coming from different pressure areas, then we can trust that. That's a strong indicator. In our organizations, assumptions are not the priorities, and the leadership is definitely trusted and approachable. We will also see what will be the positive impacts to the organization as collectively in upcoming months. Okay, so the common challenge on that one about the psychological health, when we need to take actions. Dear everyone, the reactive approach will be once it might be almost too late, or it is close to being too late. So you need to be really lucky to catch it at that time. After a burnout, frequent absences, and complaints among the individuals, teams, and groups of individuals, it might be often too late to prevent this harm. This is, as we know, risk. This is where risk management is helpless, because risk is effect of uncertainty. But here we don't have uncertainty, it is certainty. So it is an instant, it is a non-conformity, or it can even go beyond these definitions as well. Proactive approach, which is the risk management, is the one may not always be the most efficient, but the most effective one to prevent these. So identifying and addressing psychosocial risks before they escalate through structured assessment, globally recognized risk assessment and risk treatment processes, an open culture that will be the control. In fact, that will be one of the controls of risk management, and the leadership commitment, just like highlighted in the ISO 45001 standard clause 5, right? We have a dedicated main clause in the standard. Another time for poll questions, and we kindly seek for your feedback before we proceed. That will help us again. Okay, our poll question is, what do you think has the biggest impact on creating a psychologically safe workplace. Great one. And I'm wondering, which option will have the most votes? Okay, open communication and feedback channels is the one that has the highest votes now. Okay. And the least one is interesting, training and awareness programs. Okay. Yes, open communication and feedback channels had the highest vote. However, training and awareness programs had the least one. Okay. Thank you very much for your replies, dear everyone. I will keep that in mind about training and awareness programs, why it will be the least one. And I will have a few things to say that I personally don't agree that it should be the least to receive this. Of course, it is not a scale of importance, definitely. That's definitely what I understand. But majority of us preferred, that's also a good example, open communication and feedback channels. However, before I proceed further, I would like to say, in order to understand what does it mean to have open communications, what does it mean to be transparent, we need to train our people who will be setting that environment. We need to make them aware to be open or on what, and definitely I believe everyone here would agree that there will be some areas we should not be totally open. That's not the way to manage the organizations and even the physical and psychological health and safety, right? Okay, great one. So, supporting well-being without overstepping. A very significant, very significant information here. Dear everyone, I would like to read each of these one by one. And in some of these, I will provide my comments on that one before we proceed further. Assumption is the enemy, as we mentioned. That's why it is at the beginning. Ask to your colleagues, ask to the people who are dedicated to support you in the organization, ask to leadership. Maybe they also need to hear from you. We cannot assume leadership shall see everything happening in the organization. They need our support as well, and we need to keep this healthy information flow between tactical and operational teams to the strategic team, right? Okay, create space for conversations. The open communication that you have given most of the votes, in fact, is a good example of that. Listen without trying to fix. Amazing. So because this is the area that we are collecting more information, trying to fix, trying to be prompt may lead to breaking more things, because in some cases we may need to understand how bad the situation is, not from a single individual. Is it a widespread approach within the organization? So fixing for one person may also break the things for other groups of people. Okay, so there is no, in many cases, especially when it comes to psychological risks, there is no one-time solution for that. When we implement controls on the risk, we need to have a follow-up to see if the risk is effective or not. That will be a continuing effort for our risk treatment, in fact, to see the effectiveness of our controls. According to the level of effectiveness, we will definitely change or amend the risk levels. Signpost support. There are dedicated teams in many organizations today. They are doing that rather than a single collect initiative. Respect the boundaries. Yes, as I mentioned before, dear everyone, don't assume if someone is hesitating to salute you every morning, will be having issues. That might be some of our character. That might be for some of us the way that we are healing, and we don't want any interventions of this process. So privacy is the key here. Adjust workload where possible, 100%, a very significant one. Life safety is the first priority. Life safety includes not only physical, but also cognitive safety. This is why we need to adjust the workload from time to time. Of course, there is another thing, like adjusting workload should not be meaning always increasing the workload for another person. That may lead to another different problems as well. This is why we need to have a balance here. So rather than adjusting, we may use balancing the workload as a better discussion. So embedded in the culture, definitely that should be triggering by default rather than some external triggers like people checking on each other when there are signs. This is why, dear everyone, embedding in culture is not will not be happening only with open communications. This can happen. Maybe the only way is training and awareness. This is the way how we can build the culture. There is another way to build the culture, but that will be taking a longer time. So training and awareness will be the shortcut for that, basically, and a more trusted approach. Model healthy behaviors, definitely. We are following the leaders, and they will continue to set the tone. So this is why the culture, embedding the culture, will start from top down rather than vice versa, down to top. Okay, a few things about that. Some of the BSI initiatives, I find them quite helpful for my learning process, in fact, for my individual purposes, and the things that I shared with my colleagues and my friends from working for different organizations as well. BSI developed a prioritizing people model. The benefit of that, dear everyone, just like any other management systems, those who are familiar with management systems know this approach. Management systems cannot focus a single way. Like, we cannot only think of benefits for people because organizations exist for people as well, right? Organizations who provide us an opportunity to enjoy what we are doing, opportunity to socialize, and opportunity to financially support our families and our loved ones. We also need to consider them when providing benefits for people. So management systems, especially the ones that are developed by ISO itself, having a balancing approach, balancing effectiveness and efficiency. This is why in BSI's prioritizing people model, prioritizing people and meantime how we can ensure organizational resilience are two significant topics. I would not be having a deeper discussion on that one due to time constraints. We may not have time. That is 30 minutes, even 1 hour, even a couple of hours may not be enough for that. But I invite all of you to search for that because we have lots of free white papers. You can reach to that. It will be quite helpful, especially if you are a subject matter expert working in an organization responsible for health and safety, including psychological safety as well. Okay, so just before going through the last part of this webinar, I would like to get your opinion. All of us would like to get your opinion from these poll questions. The last poll question here is about what will be most useful for you as a next step. Okay, great. So currently we have a majority of us who thinks that taking the self-assessment to benchmark where we are, where our organization is, where we are as individuals, that will help. I personally definitely support this opinion, dear everyone. I will be also voting for that, honestly. But the other options are learning more about 45,000 and 45,003, exploring training options for our team. These are the other ones that are hot topics. Okay, but still taking the self-assessment to benchmark where we are will be helpful. We have a free tool on that one. Of course, it is not a descriptive, not from a recommendation or advisory perspective, but following the realities of the management system standard itself, it can help you to have an idea about the maturity level of your organization. So that would definitely help. Thank you very much for your replies. So let's continue to the rest of our discussions. Now, why do we need to manage the psychosocial risk? The cost of ill health to organizations. Dear everyone, while we are talking about the rest of the slides, I would like you, I kindly ask you to keep in your mind the balancing of organizational resilience, and prioritizing our people. So what will be the balance here? The cost of ill health to organizations not being able to preserve the psychological well-being of our people, the most significant resources for organizations, definitely increase staff turnover. This is one of the most common results that are seen as a result of not being able to have a psychosocial well-being. Difficulty with recruitment, because there will be a brand reputation as well. Poor productivity, poor quality, these are the things that everyone, I believe, attending will be guessing. And increased customer complaints, but more importantly, it will be boiling inside increased internal complaints. Other than this, for us, for individuals, for professionals who are working in workplaces, physical, mental, and cognitive ill health, these will be the results. Like we discussed in a couple of slides before, it is a huge red flag. If our psychosocial incident, it's not a risk anymore, started to trigger physical illness, loss of income, loss of job career. In today's world, uh, it is inevitable reality that these two are significant concerns for everyone. Financial impacts such as debt and relationship breakdowns that can be with your colleagues, with your workplaces, family and friends as well. Okay, why manage psychosocial risk? Another thing from a benefits perspective. We just discussed about the cost of not being able to manage. Now we will talk about harnessing the opportunities. As we know that risk management is not only about negative risks, it's not about threats, but also opportunities. So what are the opportunities for an organization? High performance expected from the employees, a good retention, like lower retention rates, right? Improved worker engagement, enhanced productivity, improved organizational resilience, and definitely, eventually, another significant point, legal compliance. Now, for individuals, for us, safe and healthy work environment that we enjoy working, effective work relationships that is productive, not time consuming work relationships, good work life balance, definitely, because you are most probably working in a work environment that's supporting your work life balance, career development, within the same organization or within other organizations, your current organization will be preparing you for the next step, which is also an amazing gain other than other tangible gains, right? The financial security, of course, and the fulfilling work that you enjoy. As we are spending maybe most of our time at the workplaces, that's the reality. We are looking for a work that is fulfilling for us. Wonderful. Now, as a second part of the agenda, we are moving to the international standard relevant to that. Dear everyone, I will briefly introduce you ISO 45003 standard. We now have the first edition of this standard, which is published in 2021. As some of us would recall that the first occupational health and safety standard from ISO is published in 2018, ISO 45001. Before that, just to clarify some of the questions that may arise, we had the OSAS 18001, but as some of us may know here, OSAS was not published by ISO. It was in fact sponsored by ILO, International Labour Organization. This is why ISO 45001 was the first occupational health and safety standard published by ISO. Following that, of course, this is like a standard that completes ISO 45001. 45003 standard was published. This is, I would like to say that the first international standard dealing with psychological health and safety in the workplace. That's why it is quite significant. Applicable to any organizations. You can also get the credibility of a global standard that you are following, recognized globally and agreed globally. And you will also see the consistency in this standard. In upcoming slides, I will show you the structure of the standard. So it will give you an advantage to integrate with ISO 45001. Okay, a very interesting thing for those who are familiar with ISO standards, guideline standards like 45003, generally, as a majority of them, they don't follow the harmonized structure. just like requirement standards. But ISO 45003 standard is an exception among guideline standards. It is type B standards, or we can call. It is following a harmonized structure. I will be showing you the clauses. You will also see where it has common clauses with 45,001 and other requirement standards, and where it has differentiative guideline recommendations. So it is extended with additional recommendations, as we have mentioned. Supports integration with other management systems, not only 45,001, but other relevant management systems such as ISO 22301, Business Continuity Management System, that says life safety is the first priority in the standard. So we can also have a integration with this standard. So here is the structure. As I mentioned, this structure, I believe it will be familiar for many of you here. This is what we call harmonized structure, clauses 4 to 10. But as I mentioned, the interesting thing is, and not to cause a misunderstanding, ISO 45003 is not a requirement standard. So basically, in a simple wording, it does not have any shall phrases in it. It's all mostly should, may, and can phrases. However, it is following a harmonized structure. And in these areas, we can see and hear as well additional recommendations on top of ISO 45001 standard. So we can also position 45003 as an extension, a guideline extension to ISO 45001 standards requirements about cognitive health, psychological health. So here are some deep dive into it. As you see in the risk management part, we have additional guidance on hazard identification for psychological risks and objectives to address psychosocial risks. So we have some recommendations to list down psychosocial risks, not only physical risks. Okay, physical safety risks. So ISO 45003 structure, we continue here. This is clause, other clauses, dear everyone. Under clause 7, we have an additional clause, which I find it very important, confidentiality. That also takes privacy information management system, ISO 27701. So as you see, this standard has connections with many other standards, not only, if we can call it, the mother standard of it, 45001. Confidentiality is a very interesting and very well prepared guideline in this standard. I would recommend everyone to take a look at it, because this is one of the hot topic discussions today on how we can ensure confidentiality of psychological risks, assessments, incident reports, which is an obstacle among people to have open communications. I will not be feeling comfortable to open myself to the subject matter experts in my organization who may support me with my psychological well-being if I know my privacy information, or if I assume my privacy information will not be preserved appropriately. So this is an obstacle at the beginning. Just like in our first poll session, you have mentioned that open communication is the most significant part, and that you think that it will help us to have a mature environment. If we don't preserve the confidentiality, that will be one of the biggest obstacles to prevent open communication culture in the organization. Okay, this is now clause 8. That will be the last slide of our webinar before we go to the Q&A session. Dear everyone, clause 8 as the heart of every requirement standard, as the engine of every requirement standard, as operations, we have multiple additions from this 45003 standard. As you see, I would like to go to titles one by one, quite a significant part. Psychosocial risk control measures. Please remember, these are not from a requirement perspective. These are listed from a guidelines, recommendations perspective with the should phrases. Psychosocial risk controls measures related to work organization. Psychosocial risk control measures related to social factors. So basically, a dedicated guideline for risk treatment on psychosocial risk management. Psychosocial risk control measures related to work environment, equipment, and hazardous tasks. And the last one is signs of exposure to psychosocial risk. We tried to list a few of them as an example at the beginning of this webinar. Okay, so this is all from our presentations. In the last around 20 minutes, I will try to answer any of your questions that may happen. So we are having the Q&A session. If you did not post, but if you are planning to post any questions, please don't hesitate. I will be reviewing the questions here and try to answer as much as we can. Okay. So we have one question here that looks an interesting one. I would like to start with this. How do you get senior leadership to take psychological health seriously when it is not seen as a priority? Great one. Dear everyone, as I mentioned in the poll session, in one of them I have seen that training and awareness was selected as the least. It is not about importance. You have to select one of these options, of course, but it all starts with awareness, and awareness, the highest support of awareness is got from training. So for our leadership team, what I would recommend is starting with awareness sessions for them, explaining to them what are the high risks and the cost of poor psychosocial risk management, poor psychological well-being in the organization. When we are talking about the cost, in fact, to the organization, we have a huge advantage here. We will be talking to humans. Our leaders are also humans. They are also working in the same workplace. They may also be exposed to same risk, which they may have not realized, or they are having early signs of realizing. This is why when we are presenting this to our top management, to our senior leadership team, they will relate it maybe even more than other presentations. Because they might be also in the same conditions with us. So this presentation, this awareness session, this senior management briefing can start discussions about that. The other one is, I would definitely recommend to make our senior leadership team aware of international standards published for that. 45,001 would be a beginning as a requirement standard, but then it can be followed with 45,003. So our senior leadership team can see the efforts that are done globally, and that can trigger for them to think about, why don't we apply these international standard practices, these frameworks within our workplace, as there is such an effort already. So this is why I can summarize that what needs to be done to get our senior leadership to take psychological health seriously. The answers will be two things. One of them is awareness, educating them just like everyone else, senior management briefing sessions, and the other one is, as part of the education, maybe as part of this training, maybe making them aware of international standards that exist in the world. Okay, let me look for some other questions. Okay, Ogechukwu, thank you very much. That's an interesting one. Yes, definitely, Ogechukwu. BSI offer training courses on occupational health and safety. Not only 45,001, 45,003 as well. From memory, we have a one-day training course, but definitely our teams at commercial, sales, marketing, and operations, they will support you with this request. Great. Does ISO 45001 cover and address psychological health in the workplace? Or the organization? Amazing question. Loved it. Okay, great. In fact, since 2018, this question has been asked, and then we got a solid answer in 2021 when 45,003 is published. Now, dear everyone, ISO 45,001 requires psychological health, cognitive health to be considered and to take actions against that. That's a requirement. However, ISO 45003 complements 45,001 from an area or from a questions perspective. Okay, but what do you recommend as an international standard? 45,001 does not provide a detailed answer to that question. The recommendations about psychosocial risk management, recommendations about well-being issues or opportunities, these are listed in ISO 45003. So this is why reading ISO 45001 together with 45003 will help us to have a more effective approach in establishing a robust psychosocial risk management within the organization. Okay. Oh, great questions are coming. There is a question about the difference between 45,001 and 45,003, but I can see that this question has been asked at an early time. I believe we gave an answer to that during our presentation. Okay. Dear Ahmed, yeah, there is a question here. How can organizations assess psychosocial risk effectively? Okay, another amazing one. Dear everyone, in fact, this question from Ahmed is at the heart of occupational health safety management, because the heart of it is risk management. Now, I would like to talk about a few methodologies here. In fact, it may not be correct to say methodologies. Maybe we can call it frameworks that can help. First of all, we need to implement a robust and effective, but not only robust and effective, also efficient, manageable, feasible risk management approach. For a moment, please take occupational health and safety, psychosocial risk management aside. Let's focus on risk management. That's the beginning point. Now, in order to have a tailor-made, robust, effective, at the same time efficient and feasible risk management, we need to follow other global guidelines on that. Like what? ISO 31000, a very significant standard, which we have the second edition today. The first time it was published in 2008. ISO 31000 will provide us a framework, a baseline, a starting point to establish the fundamentals, the backbone of our risk management. Following that, there is a standard which is not quite popular in the market, but it will be really helpful to know. IEC 31010 from International Electrotechnical Commission. This standard has a list of risk assessment techniques. And some of these risk assessment techniques are quite relevant either to your organization and or health and safety management. So rather than going with traditional risk management that has been implemented in your organization for the last couple of decades maybe, checking this standard, IEC 31010, will help us to reach to larger visions, if I can call it. So you can select the right risk treatment techniques, risk assessment techniques from there and apply it in your health and safety management. Dear everyone, as I mentioned, these efforts are not only for effectiveness, but also balancing with efficiency and have a manageable risk management structure in your organization. Following that, dear everyone, on top of this, the next thing is we need to, because now we have the baseline of our risk management, right? We need to use ISO 45001 requirements as a framework. We have risk management requirements there, and we need to feed it with recommendations from 45003. So these multiple layers, like constructing a building, will help us. Of course, in the future, you will be changing it, you will be amending it, you will be making more tailor-made for organization, but that will be a great starting point. So, dear Ahmed, as I mentioned, I definitely recommend starting with the international practices, but we also need to know the sequence of them. The generic ones with risk management, ISO 31000, then going through IEC 31010, understanding risk assessment techniques. On top of that, establishing our structure with 45001 and 45003 standards. Thank you very much for the question. Okay, we have a question from Zahra. Thank you very much, dear Zahra. Let me read that. Great one. If you don't mind, I would like to share it with everyone because this is everyone's concern. You know, from an organizational perspective, right? Dear everyone, this great question followed with a comment saying that I don't want to sound robotic because I don't want to sound like opportunist or inhuman, right? If I can call that. Because when we are talking about psychological risk management, we also need to preserve the credentials of our organization or interest of our organization. So yes, it is for humans. Priority is humans, but it cannot be only for humans. So, dear Zahra, thank you very much for this great question. And also, thank you very much for the comment and giving me the opportunity to talk about this. Now, let me start with that one. Return of investment is a must for any effort that we are having. But is this return of investment, does it only have to be financial? You know, what we call ROI is not only financial. There are other intangible benefits for the organization. The only problem is we always link it with financials. It is more tangible and easy to calculate and easy to present. However, the return of investment of these efforts for organizations, just like what we have listed in this presentation, can be shown with reduced turnover rate or good turnover rate, let's call it. That's better. With increasing performance of the organization, with more interest of the others in the market to work in our organization, because we have a reputation being a happy workplace. So these are also the return of investment that we are having. So when we are talking our top management, there will be definitely financial ROIs as well that we are talking that we may talk here. But other than this, we can also show this perspective. And following that, like I mentioned, dear everyone, the decision makers in our organization are still humans. Still part is just a sarcastic one for the AI future that we are anticipating, right? But this is our decision makers are still humans. They are humans, and they are going through the same process that we are going through. This is why the return of investment, not only to the organization, but to the individuals as well. Look, if we consider your well-being, you are investing to your future. You are investing to your relations with your colleagues and your family. You are investing to yourself, that having a fulfilling job, a job that you are enjoying. When we are talking, dear everyone, our examples might be the workplace. But as I and other colleagues of mine, subject matter experts of BSI, tutors, auditors have been there, you see that these leaders are taking examples for themselves. So they are making decisions from that perspective, not only from a professional hat that they are wearing. So this is why the return of investment for both organizations and individuals of psychological risk management is quite high. And I can say that the efforts that we are spending there is minimal compared to the efforts that we need to spend when the things go wrong, when these risks become incidents. From that perspective, we can only think about the ROI will be definitely always to be higher, in fact. Thank you for the amazing question. Okay. Thank you. All right, great. There are a few more couple of questions that keep coming, but unfortunately, we don't have time to answer all of them. There is one more question I would like to answer. I have selected as the last one. As I mentioned, dear everyone, your questions will be replied, not as part of this live session, but we will definitely reach out to you. But I would like to go with one last question on that. Okay, this question is about this. What is the necessity of 45,003 for organizations who already have a mature 45,001? Quite a valid one, because 45,001 is in place for the last, I think we are celebrating, I believe, now these months, these nowadays, the 8th year of ISO 45001. So that's almost a decade. It's a long time. for a management system to be in place. So this is why we are expecting many organizations to have a mature level. However, as I mentioned here, everyone, ISO 45003 is not a competitive of 45001. It's not a replacement of 45001. It is a standard that completes the psychosocial risk management of 45001, more importantly, from a guideline perspective. This is why, for those who are not quite familiar with ISO standards, I would definitely recommend you to take a look at the differences between the requirements, or we officially call them type A, and the guideline, which we call them type B standards, so that we can understand the relation between them. 45003 is there to support 45001. Can we implement 45003 as standalone? Yes, you can. Without 45001, yes, you can. Even it may not be quite a logical move to do that, honestly, from an effectiveness perspective, but that's also possible. However, the recommendation is would be definitely to use these standards together, not only from a certification perspective, but from the benefits of this international standard. At least to have an idea about what is happening in this standard would help us a lot when we are establishing a framework within our organization for managing psychosocial risks. I would like to thank you, everyone who were here for this 1 hour. I hope that, in fact, I truly believe that this session was helpful to all of you. On behalf of BSI, thank you again, and looking forward to meet you in our next webinars. Please remember, the next one, the closest one, is May 11th. I recommend all of you to subscribe. Even you will not be able to attend, you will be getting other collaterals from this webinar just by subscriptions. Thank you very much again, dear all. I wish you a great morning, afternoon, or night, wherever you are joining from to this presentation. Bye for now.